Okay, let's get started, I would say.
All right.
Okay, so now officially, good morning, good afternoon, wherever this finds you. My name is Helge Osterhold. I'm one of the core faculty in East-West Psychology here at the California Institute of Integral Studies. And I had the honor, privilege, pleasure to be the chair of this dissertation committee. I want to welcome everyone. First of all, our defender, our dissertation writer, Sadhana Louise Stupar, who's going to present her work here today. Good morning.
Good morning.
I also want to welcome formally our external reviewer, Dr. Ellen Bader, who is here. And Ellen is one of the early founders of couples therapy, as well as a recognized thought leader and trailblazer in relationship therapy worldwide. She co-founded the Couples Institute and co-authored Tell Me No Lies together with her husband. And the two of them are trusted resources on TV, radio, podcast, print publications, appearing in many forms of media over the years, and have evolved the field of couples therapy through their tireless commitment. She offers world-class trainings to thousands of therapists on applying the developmental model and becoming masterful at couples therapy. Thank you for being here, Ellen. And I also want to welcome the second committee member, Dr. Janice Phelps. Good morning. Janice is a leader in the field of psychedelic therapy training and the director of the CIS Center for Psychedelic Therapies and Research. And as the center's founder, Dr. Phelps developed and launched the first university-accredited postgraduate training for psychedelic therapy and research. Her 2017 journal publication, Developing Guidelines and Competencies for the Training of Psychedelic Therapists, describes best practices in the academic training of medical and mental health professionals in this field. Previously, she served as the Dean of Faculty at CIS and for many years as a core faculty member in our East-West Psychology department and graduate program. Dear colleague, welcome, Janice.
Thank you, Helge.
Okay, and I want to just say a few words on how this process here this morning will go. So we'll hand over the mic very soon to Sadhana to present her work to us. That will take somewhere around 45 minutes or so, her presentation. And after the presentation, each committee member has some time to give comments, a brief assessment of the work, and ask the candidate questions. They might be challenging, but no trick questions. This should be a lively and interesting conversation here together. And after our back and forth with comments and questions, we will retreat. The committee will retreat to discuss the merits of the work and to decide whether any further changes are needed to this work, or is it whether it's approved. And during that time, the audience has the opportunity to engage with Sadhana and ask their own questions and be in conversation. We'll come back after usually 10-15 minutes to present our decision. The entire process should be somewhere between an hour and a half and 2 hours. Yeah. So welcome everyone at home or wherever you're calling in from. And thank you for being here. Also, thank you for being here, our program assistant, Hua Wei. Good morning, who Hua will be the technical manager and make sure everybody is able to participate. If everybody can please be mindful to put yourself on mute unless you are unmuting on purpose, so there's no background sounds or anything interfering. I think that's all I have for now, and it's my pleasure to hand it over to you, Sadhana.
Thank you, Helge. I'm going to go ahead and open up my PowerPoint. I've kind of developed that to serve as a guideline to for talking, and you can get a better idea of some of the highlights of the research itself and the research process. So the title of my work is Narratives of Adoption, Adoptee Stories from the Closed Adoption Era. And this, I just want to start out with this quote from Louise Erdrich's book, The Plague of Doves. It really captures the essence of the experience of closed adoption. I know she meant it in general, but it really struck me as an important statement. When we are young, the words are scattered all around us. As they are assembled by experience, so also are we, sentence by sentence, until the story takes shape. So I'll introduce myself a little bit. I am a closed adoption era adoptee. I was born in 1960. I was adopted at 2 weeks old from a mother and baby home in New England. It was kind of a regional home where at the time, a lot of unwed mothers went and had their babies and placed them for adoption. And then, they were encouraged to move on. I did my birth search in 2007. I found my mother. It was a very synchronistic experience. I found her immediately as soon as I started the search, and because I hired a private investigator. And she was still friends with my father. So I found both sides of my family. It's been quite a journey. This project has been in the making for 10 years, from my very first class, my very first seminar course in the doctoral program, East-West Psychology. So I named it the closed adoption era. Some people call it the baby scoop era, but that's not as precise of a term. It doesn't cover the refined details, so to speak. And it's also used in Canada for a particular baby scoop, which was more Indigenous involved. So I decided to call this closed adoption era. Basically, it's the post-World War II boom years from the end of the war, 1945, through 1973. Of course, in 1973, there was also abortion became legal, so there were other options for women who chose to do so. But it's a very distinct period. The start and finish of it is very, it's like it's got two very clear endings. Of course, this is very middle class experience for the most part. And of course, during the boom years, the middle classes, that was when they were really well established and they grew. So adoption practices at that time, the primary thing was secrecy. It was confidential adoptions. The person's original birth certificate was locked away by the state, and only now, 60, 70 years later, people are able to access their original birth certificates. My home state, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, they finally said, okay, if you want it, you can come get it. You can apply for it. I haven't bothered because by that time I'd found my parents. So, but what this did, there was a time too where it went from church-based charities to more of a professional approach. From psychiatry became more involved. Social work field developed, and they became more involved in it as well. But at the end of the day, what it created was a psychological cohort of people who had similar experiences in terms of adoption, not in terms, it was very unique in the family setting, but psychologically, they had a similar process. So during that time period, Freudian psychology was at the height from 1945 to 1965. It was really popular in the US. And really developing as a scientific approach to psychology. The research developed alongside this cohort of adoptees, starting in the early 50s. And in the 60s, they started to really see an overrepresentation of adoptees in the clinical setting. And so people, started exploring, doing, papers and research. But one popular person who's become well known is John Bowlby. And his work falls in the recovery after adversity trend, where in Europe, in England especially, he studied children, war orphans, that had been lost parent or both parents. And he started to see a particular presentation in these children, the root of which is very deep mourning. And so his work, he went into, he developed, he researched the separation, the effects of separation between mother and child, and the effects of loss. In later years, more, kind of after 2000, the research kind of went more towards neurobiological, relational, developmental approaches. So, but what John Bowlby's work really resonated with this research for a number of reasons. I'd known about him for a while, but I hadn't gone deeply into his work as I did when I was doing this research project. So it really helped me understand some things. First of all, he just determined that there was a behavioral system between mother and child. So it's, very instinctive, very, ancient process. And it offers, especially for the child, it offers a feeling of containment and emotional homeostasis. It's it's a dyadic relationship, very close. So for infants and children who have lost this attachment, he started to see, that he came up with 4 characteristics that were common. One was anger at the loss and disbelief that it even happened. And one thing that's really important for this particular study is searching for the lost person, hoping for a reunion, and extended mourning. And he, along with Mary Ainsworth and her work in the secure base and attachment communication, they developed patterns of attachment that were common in separation situations. So this quote has always meant a lot to me. To be rooted is perhaps the most important and least recognized need of the human soul. And that was written by Simone Weil just in 1949 after the war. So I wanted to state the problems, the kind of the essence of the problems for the adoptee in closed adoption. First of all, we're kind of grafted onto a family tree. We don't really have genealogical roots in the family. There's no knowledge of a native place, it's like where you're from. And it kind of leaves you with no place in history, really. You can kind of have some ideas, but you don't know for sure. And within the adoptive family, they might provide an origin story for the adoptee. but it's not enduring, it's not lasting. It might be designed for, very young children, but it, by the time you hit adolescence, it kind of doesn't serve the purpose very well anymore. Because of the secrecy, there's a deficiency in communication within the adopted family. Frequently, it's just kept under the rug. It's just not spoken about. And the acknowledgments of difference, meaning the families are pretending, we're a family, but they don't acknowledge that because of the secrecy, they didn't really acknowledge the difference of being a family built by adoption. But most adoptees were told, yes, you're adopted. So they know they had two identities. And it's kind of creates a situation of who am I really? So to format the research, I came up with these, took me a while. Janice helped me in a narrative research class, how to format the research. So the research questions: what has been the effects of closed adoption on the life experience of an individual adopted as an infant by unrelated strangers during the closed adoption era? But I wanted to go deeper into the process. So the second question was, how have narratives and stories informed or contributed to this experience, especially as part of the individuation process? Individuation in this case is Jung's version of individuation, to be clear. So I used the narrative research method. I interviewed 3 participants, 90 minutes interview length. I recorded it on Zoom, both audio and video. So it was, I was able to reference it, go back and reference it during the analysis part. The participants were all born in the closed adoption era period. And they were all adopted as infants or toddlers before development of explicit memory. Each was a closed adoption by US people in the US, American citizens. And the adoptees had no initial knowledge of their first family for a long time, usually not until they found them in their midlife. In terms of data analysis, I use narrative analysis methods, looking for themes and thematic relationships, and also the structure of the interview transcript, the orientation of the person. For instance, one of the participants was very visually oriented in her language. And important words and phrases like home or belonging or orphanage, these were kind of power words to me. They kind of stuck out. So those were important to look at. And then I applied the Jungian conceptual lens. After writing up the analysis in a narrative way, I applied the Jungian conceptual lens to the findings. And what I was looking at, of course, was the entire individuation is a lifespan. So not just small periods like in adolescent where people expect problems, or even at midlife. But I wanted to see the whole life, as long as because most of the people I talked to were over 60, so that was pretty cool. And I was looking for activities involving the persona and the shadow, the complexes that developed from the experiences, and synchronistic events that happen to people where things kind of came together almost in a supernatural way or a spiritual way, and numinous events, things that attracted them towards a healing process. In terms of bracketing assumptions and biases, I used a reflexive journal. I used it a lot. I got pretty deep into some emotional explorations, explorations about my personal experience, some special topics, and things like countertransference. So, to be clear, so I wouldn't affect the research in a negative way. The interview questions, first question was, I asked them about their overall adoption experience. Second was about family stories of adoption told within the family about the person's adoption, how they were told and what they were told. If there were any stories they made up about themselves, it's, children have fantasy lives, and especially if you're adopted, you can let your imagination run wild on who your birth parents were. Importantly, I asked them about favorite fairy tales, books, or movies, and you'll see later why that was the most important. And also how their experience of these stories changed over time. So, it gave kind of an arc of experience. And this is a little bit, I'll show you why. So Jung described it, the arc of individuation, as kind of the sun rising in in the east and setting in the west, and then a whole lot of activity that goes on in between. And so he's considered, one of the first lifespan psychologists. Another thing that he covered was within individuation, there's a telos, or a primary goal or purpose. And that rises to the surface, particularly if you look in these gray areas. These are transition zones where adolescence and midlife and retirement, where you're changing, and things are kind of unsettled. And this is where the elements of adoption come up for attention. First in adolescence, when you're really looking for your identity out in the world. If you don't know your background, it's kind of rough. You don't even know what your ethnicity is. At midlife, it comes up, and you'll see later. Midlife is where many adoptees actually do the birth search, where they actively look for their first family. And then retirement is kind of, that shift, and it comes up again during that time, because you're going to review over your life and kind of pull it all together. And one thing that became really clear when, and looking at it in this way, is that the events at birth, right here down at the bottom, before, as you're born, the events at birth and early infancy, they create a potential for a specific telos of CAE adoption. So another thing that was important about using Jung is that he considered the unconscious, and of course, the most important one is personal. When you're thinking, about persona and shadow, that's going to involve the personal level of the unconscious, but also the family, because you've got, mother, father, their influences in there. And one thing that kind of, it really struck me recently when I was looking again at the different layers of the unconscious, is that he did mention primate animal levels and the instinctive levels. And that is one way that he connects with Bowlby's work, because Bowlby went into ethology and, looking at animal behaviors and attachment through that angle. And, Jung's unconscious includes the instinctive as well. And what was really exciting for me to find. Jean Knox wrote a whole book on this about attachment and Jungian psychology. And what she did, or she pulled it together, is that Bowlby and Jung have very similar functional models. I'm referring to them as they're actually models of embodied cognition. And this is like from the very beginning, where you start when you're born in that attachment relationship, you start integrating sensory information and it gets sorted out into an image schema of similarities. Emotions are also a part of that experience, the embodied experience. And Bowlby called it the internal working model. And this is what he has developed as kind of a complex that continues to inform your activities in an unconscious way, because it's been stored in implicit memory. And Jung's is equivalent. Jung had the archetype, which he relates to being instinctive, and archetype and the image and emotion creates a complex, and it resides in the unconscious. So this was an exciting find for me. It clarified a lot of things. And it also brought Bowlby and Jung together for me, because I was really resistant to Bowlby's work for a while. Helge talked me and she says, Sadhana, you got to do it. So I went back and I got into it in a deeper way, and it really panned out. So in considering Jung's work, there's also the metaphorical extensions of the image schemas and archetypes. They play a big role in preconceptual recognition, when you feel it, you see something you recognize, but you don't know why. It's kind of a resonance or a numinous attraction. And that ties in with Jung's mythopoetic perspective and using mythology and story to demonstrate the process of individuation. And a happy find for me was one thing they recommend in narrative research in terms of validity, overcoming the limits of language to express meaning. Polkinghorne recommends encouraging you people to use figurative expressions, the people you're interviewing. And that happily was part of my study design. One, in question 4, when I asked about their favorite fairy tales or books or movies, people gave examples that were extraordinary. And part of the research is, of course, I had to go watch the movies, read the books, look at the stories, and they were extraordinary in conveying the deeper meaning of the person's experience. So it overcame the limitations of language. And also using the Jungian lens, of course, going into the unconscious and looking at the different aspects of the unconscious also overcame the limitations of language. So that was a happy, a happy find. So my 3 participants, and these are pseudonyms, of course, to protect their privacy. But Jay was my first person. He was born in 1954 in Ireland, and he spent his first 2 years at Castle Pollard mother and baby home, which was how they structured things in Ireland. The homes there are operated by an order of nuns. Typically, they're kind of punitive settings. They're not very, very fun places. However, he found that even though he was in a joint, a group nursery for 2 years, his mother worked in the nursery at night, so he got to spend time with her, along with a lot of other different caregivers while he was there. Rose was, I call her my foundling. She was born in 1959. Her parents were married, but there was some problems with the marital relationship, and there was some infidelity that went on. And back then they didn't have paternity tests, so he said to to her mother, it's me or the kid. So anyway, long story short, Rose ended up at Children's Aid Society, and was placed for adoption through there as an infant. Ruby was born in 1967 in San Francisco. Her mother, her birth mother, was attracted to the music scene back then, the Summer of Love and all that. But she was quite young and not married. And so Ruby was placed for adoption through the San Francisco Department of Social Services. She was fostered for a little while, and then she was adopted at 9 weeks. I want to tell you a little bit about them too. Jay, it was a very interesting fellow, very quiet and reserved, but he was an avid reader, a librarian, retired now, and he really likes history, detective and spy novels, military novels, that type of thing. Rose is a closet philosopher. She really loves philosophy. She came across it when she went to college, and that's one of her big interests. She worked for many years in community health in her town where she grew up, and she enjoys travel and adventure. Ruby is a singer-songwriter, musician, artist, and a writer. And she's a lovely creative person. I really enjoyed talking with her. So I did a comparative summary, after all the analyses, the general narrative analyses and the Jungian analyses. I started seeing so many similarities and areas of comparison. So these are a few of them. General areas of comparison that I pulled from the narrative analyses. There were different influences on the adoptees in terms of culture and zeitgeist of the time. It shifted by decade a little bit. There was kind of the Americana, early Americana, and then moved into the civil rights era, and also the changing of family structure as you moved into the 70s. Origin stories was each one was a little bit different. Jay, his mom told him when he was like, 9 or 10. And until that time, he didn't know he was adopted, really. So, but both Rose and Ruby knew from the time they were very small. Religion and spirituality, it wasn't, it just came out in the process where I just learned, Jay was placed through the Catholic Church. His adoption handled that. Rose was raised, New England Protestant, and Ruby was adopted by a Jewish family. Attachment and family relations, that's a big area of comparison. And if I were to say very briefly, Jay was fairly secure in his attachment. Family relations were really good, very lovely family. Rose ran into some trouble when she hit puberty. There was a lot of discord between she and her mom, and that influenced her relationship with her dad. So that was pretty tough. Ruby did not end up in a good situation at all. There was no attachment, family relationships were pretty rugged, and she ended up being the scapegoat. So that was not a happy situation. One thing that I'd always thought about, and I did explore, was a connection with place, because I always felt like that was important for me. So I looked at it, and what I came up with for my three people is that Jay had more of a place identity. He really identified, over time, he started to identify with his Irish heritage, and he was really happy when he got his Irish passport. I mean, that was like proof in hand. I'm Irish, so that was exciting for him. But there's also place attachment when attachment at home is not very good. And so I saw this with Rose and Ruby. Rose was attached to her hometown. Ruby attached to a very lovely nature-oriented island that she ended up visiting. Self-healing methods were really important. I found with Jay, he used movies and films for kind of the feeling of nostalgia of his lovely family life when he was young. Very interesting. Rose, in her situation, developed kind of this very organic process of active imagination and dream work over time. And she still uses that today. She's used it all her life to, be in touch with her inner self and the unconscious. And Ruby used healing in nature and body work, massage, and writing. Writing is a big thing for her in terms of healing. So I also, because I was using Jung, I went deeply into this, the hero's journey or quest as the process of individuation. And it, one thing that you see in all of these hero's journey stories is that the person is usually an orphan or has been orphaned in some way. And, that's really speaks to the experience of the CAE adoption. It's also that attachment injury is an injury to instinct, that instinctive need to attach between mother and child. When that's broken, it creates its, in mythopoetic terms, it's an unhealing wound. The unhealing wound is represented in like the Fisher King or Chiron, where they carry on and they do great things, but it really hurts. So, and it doesn't resolve fully. It's something you have to come to terms with. And so especially, and this is where it's in popular, people recognize it, as popular psychology, the archetypes. But what I was able to do in this study was actually clarify archetypes have in two qualities. One, as they are emergent, where they arise out of experience. So for instance, the attachment separation creates an archetypal experience of losing containment and of being alone in the world. It really is a very distinct feeling. But archetypes, as they're popularized, are more of the numinous form, where the person is attracted to it as a possibility of healing. It serves as a guide towards what the person needs to heal psychologically. And Donald Kalsched says it best. I was running out of words there, but I really love this, how he describes it, where he says, the mythopoetic matrix is where the human soul finds a medium for growth and development. This is the matrix from which all the meaningful stories grow. And the soul needs a story, a resonant image that is adequate to its own biography. The soul needs a story, a resonant image that is adequate to its own biography. And so here we are, archetypes at work. And here I kind of looked at the dominant qualities and events in relation to the shadow, the complex, the numinous, and synchronicity. Now, Jay, I love that he went from, kind of the orphan, and he embraced the hero. And ultimately, in his choice of reading, he kind of moved from being a hero to a warrior, which is really exciting to see. It's kind of a natural process, particularly in male psychology. Um, a lot of his stories that he shared about experience, he described he says, my family was like, the family, the Cleavers and Leave It to Beaver. He says, we were like that, very a close family, very, loving relationships, working through issues and so forth. And he said, Hallmark movies were important to him also. They really expressed his experience. And he used them nostalgically, even now, just to get that feeling when he wants to feel close and safe and secure in his family. But Jack Reacher is much more an adventurer and a warrior, a little itinerant fellow. His methods are unique and exciting, but he gets the job done. So for Jay, part of his shadow, not just the shadow identity, but the shadow experience was the orphanage. And a dominant complex for him was the orphan. And he even experienced it his parents died, I believe, in 2014, 2015, both of them kind of consecutively. And it really hit him hard that he was an adult orphan. So here again, it's like these complexes rise up at different points in life, because he was also at the point of retirement at the same time. So what was numinous for him was Jack Reacher. The author of Jack Reacher books refers to Jack as being a kind of a knight errant, like Lancelot, going out and doing good deeds and warrior skills and tough and not afraid of death kind of thing. And the synchronous event in his life was when his second marriage, he happened to marry a first mother who had placed a child for adoption. So they had something in common, and he was able to bring out his hidden identity in that relationship. She was really lovely. She really supported him and helped him find his mom in Ireland. But at the same time, he lost his parents, and then he did the birth search. So there was kind of a confluence of events. And that was all part of his individuation. So now for Rose, the wasteland and symbols of transformation were kind of the topics. As a foundling, her shadow was that of abandonment, but also her adoptive parents' insecurity in their relationship and what was going on in the home. She felt a lot of anger and confusion over her experience. She couldn't wait to leave the house. And when I asked her about books from childhood, she says, I really didn't vibe with any of it. She goes, but when I got to college, I found Kafka. And she read everything he ever wrote, and she really liked Camus also. And I thought, what is that about? And it occurred to me that the absurdism and experience, um, was part of it. I think she related to it, the existentialism. Um, so I think that was her vibe from those stories. But what she found numinous was from a film, The Wasteland. It was a documentary film about an artist who went to the largest landfill in Brazil, and he worked with the landfill workers there. The art project took 3 years, and he took items from the landfill, and he made these enormous photographs of the workers using this stuff from the landfill. And he took like pictures of them. He was able to show them in museums and things like that. And he actually sold them and gave the money to the people. But anyway, she found that whole process transformative, because she was related to, it's like, yeah, they were thrown away. Yeah, I was thrown away. But she saw the transformation from something, a person unwanted, to something of value. And that really struck her. That movie really obsessed her, she said. The synchronicities she had was really crazy. Her boyfriend got a job working for the state, and he came across her original birth records. He says, "Do you want to know? Do you want to know?" So she said, "Yeah." um, Now, Ruby, her stories involve the underworld, and the wounded healer. The underworld, I had never seen this story. The Girl Who Trod on a Loaf, Hans Christian Andersen's story about a young woman who ends up in the underworld, a hellish place. And that really was descriptive of Ruby's experience within her adoptive family. How she healed when she was, a colleague recommended to her, go to this island, stay there for a while. And while she actually stayed for 2 years. And at that time, a book on healing from incest was published, and she found that book. It's called Obsidian Mirror. And from that story, the numinous experience as a wounded healer really helped her. So in closing, we covered the closed adoption era, the events and culture that created it, the idea of individuation for closed adoption era adoptees, looking at the lifespan, the telos and the stages of development. I looked at, Bowlby and Jung, the embodied cognition models they developed with talking about image, emotion, and patterns of behavior, how stories take shape in the psyche, and how this all relates to attachment, separation, and loss, particularly for the adoptee. We looked at adoptee stories, the origin stories, the experience of adoption, the stories where they found redemption and transformation for themselves psychologically, and reaching equanimity with the experience, holding the tension of opposites, Jung would call it, the feeling of you can't fix it, but you can, be okay with it. And I didn't put the, one thing I mentioned in the paper itself is that this doesn't just apply to adoptees at this time period. It applies to other adoptee cohorts, and in particular, anybody who is, conceived or born of anonymous reproductive technology, it's important to consider, the effect of origin stories on the person's experience. So with that, I'd like to, I'll end here, getting a little tired of talking, and I will turn it over to Helge and Janice and Ellen for questions.
Okay, thank you, Sadhana. If we can stop the share, maybe for now, if we have to want to look at something again, there you are. Thank you. Okay, I want to actually hand it over to Ellen as our external member, give her the first opportunity to give some comments, assessment, further questions that you have. And yeah, Ellen, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, I'll be glad to. I think I would like to start by saying, your commitment to this topic and your dedication to your subjects really shows through in both your writing and in your presentation. And for me, I think that's a strong thing. I know we can influence data by our own histories and all of that, but I think you really were trying to walk a good line between not being overly influenced and still having a high level of commitment to digging into your topic as deeply as you could. So I think it's a privilege to read it and to hear you talk about it. And I'm pretty new to this group of all the faculty and to that, so I'm going to just say there's lots of pieces here we could talk about. One of the interesting questions that came to my mind was, especially since you used Bowlby as well as Jung, was whether your sense was that your J ended up seeming to have the best adaptation because he actually did have 2 years with his mother, even though it was in a very difficult situation, but he was, with her in the home in Ireland, and whether that impacted his adaptation better, or whether in fact he just was lucky to get into a really good family. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
I think it was a bunch of, it was all of that. I think he mentioned it. He himself said that, because he was able to be in touch with his mom, he felt that was part of why, he felt more ease. Personally, I think some of the ease came from, if you can imagine being in a joint nursery with lots of other little infants, and caregivers in shifts working with them, there would be some inconsistency in the caregiving. And I think when he ended up with his family that he did, one, he said he was very lucky, and I think that plays a part. He was very lucky. They were a very well-grounded family. She came from a very large farming family, lots of siblings, and just lots of love and relational interaction. And he felt safe and secure. It was solid. It was one caregiver instead of many. So I think that was part of it. And you know what? She didn't tell him until he was 9 or 10 years old that he was adopted. So he spent his first several years thinking that, or not explicitly knowing that he was adopted. And when she did tell him, it didn't really, he's like, yeah, okay, bye. And he went off for a bike ride, So it was no big deal. But she saved the papers for him, and he was able to go and look it up later. So I think it was a bunch of things. But from the sound of it, he went to an all boys Catholic school, so he had a great education. They did a lot of family things together. it was Leave It to Beaver time, So I think it was, but he clearly um, adapted very well, as compared to the other two. So
I think if you spent just 90 minutes with each of these people, is that right? In the
yeah,
interview?
yeah,
I mean, you were able to dig pretty deeply into the psyche based on what you got in
yeah,
the 90 minutes. And we're really able to identify some of the things that helped with their healing.
mm-hmm.
And I always wonder with dissertations, like, where do you take it from here? Or I might give you a two-part question, which is what's been the impact on you of doing this? And then, well, I'll break it. Go ahead. I'll just start there. What do you think has been the impact on you of doing the study?
Oh, it was a big impact. It was, this was part of my process for sure. Um, that, people learn in different ways, and they use tools of development in different ways. I've always been a reader and a writer and an inner thinker. I tend to be introverted and, personality. And so this whole process for me was, in Hindu terms, it would be as jnana yogi, meaning you learn and you develop through study. And that's how I did it. But I also, I don't know if you read the part where I had a series of dreams about it, that were at first horrifying, but at the end it came, as I really got towards the end of the process, it became really, really wonderful, and the transformation was obvious. So that to me spoke the loudest, as my dream process.
Absolutely. And I wonder whether you have ideas or hopes or thoughts about where you go with this research, or how you write it up in some way that may be helpful to others, or how you communicate it beyond. I always hate it when good dissertations die after the defense. So I just wonder what your own thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I do. I have many, and I have enough written pieces that, along with this, I believe I can pull it together to publish a book on, archetype, and including archetype in a developmental process. As it's just the two models of Bowlby and Jung really struck me. Also, because I've been a body worker since time began. I was a cranial therapist I've been a cranial therapist for 30 years. My first introduction to body work was infant massage at the birth of my son in India. His grandmother taught me the traditional massage method. And it's really clear to me how important that is in attachment, in the attachment process. Just keeping that communication between the infant and the mother. And one thing she also taught me was the infant communication, elimination communication, all of that, So those are important things, important parts of my experience that this is expanded on, so understanding what lies beneath, so to speak, the healing process. So I'm tossing around how I'm still trying to decide I think I'll do the book first, and I think that will help me clarify how I want to share it with others. I just want to pull together all of my things, but clearly it's going to involve body work and the individuation, understanding individuation and attachment. So, it may end up being workshops or
I think,
special courses.
yeah, no, I think one of the things that could be powerful for many people, and like you said, it carries into this day and age with surrogacy and other reproductive strategies,
Mhm.
the fact that the healing pieces that came through intuition, through just so many different, the Irish passport, the different ways that people reclaimed, your subjects reclaimed their identities,
Yeah,
and communicating that to a broader audience seems to me like it would have a lot of value.
yeah, yeah. I've thought of that too. I think for parents, of children conceived and born in alternate ways, I think it's important that, they have an awareness of how story affects the child's experience, and um, the early stories, and then, healing stories later on. So, yep.
Helga, how about if I pass the mic to someone else at this point?
Okay, okay. And if something stirs in you and you want to come back with another question, we can come back. I'll give it to you, Janice, then, for comments and questions.
Sure, thank you. I have two primary ones, and I'll go for the first one, which is more about the data rather than the methodology. And so I'm wondering, we didn't talk about it too much in the dissertation, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on the self-healing methods. We've talked about all kinds of other demographics and developmental changes, but I wonder if you have any thoughts about the types of self-healing methods used by your participants. And did you see any patterns there related to any of the other aspects of their background, their attachment styles, their histories, the archetypal influences that they were moving through? I'm wondering about that. Were the self-healing methods a correlation, a side effect, or did the self-healing methods possibly drive some of the change that they went through? It's all supposition here because we don't have data that directly correlating it, but I wondered what your intuitions were about it.
Right. Well, so my sense is, I mean, all of these were very organic processes. So they arose from the based on the person's early experiences and continued experiences with their families, with their adoptive families, and then, into adult life. I mean, like Jay, I mentioned his use of the Hallmark movies for nostalgia. I think, for him, it was a form of self-regulation. When things aren't feeling good, or you're feeling unsettled, or getting unregulated, watch a Hallmark movie was reminiscent of his feeling of safety and comfort in his adoptive family setting. And so that's, something that he uses even now, which is I think is really lovely. And there's actually a whole field of study on nostalgia at a university. I think it's in Sussex, England. If you're interested, I can send you information on that. Definitely for Rose, her first active imagination, she started using when she would get in fights with her mom. She'd go in a room and start imagining what her birth mom was like. and she would imagine herself what she would be, you know, like with her birth mom. And so that was a real tool for her. And then it carried over into dream work later on. She even was telling me about how she had a dream once that was kind of upsetting for her. And in a bodywork process, she was able to go back in and reclaim that dream and kind of re-story it, and turn it around and make it into something more healing. So she became really efficient with using the dream work in terms of helping her heal and grow. And with Ruby, nature was required. I mean, she between the scapegoating and sexual abuse that she experienced in her adoptive home, nature was required for her to heal. She had to get away and completely just check out, do a full retreat. She lived rough on the island for 2 years. And to me, that was a form of self-regulation, getting rooted, and really just getting over. She had gone into kind of a freeze process, and then the natural rhythms, I think, helped her out of that. When she came across the book where she encountered the idea of the wounded healer, the archetype, part of that memoir, the woman's healing process began with receiving body work and then learning body work and then helping others with it. So it was a very progressive thing for Ruby in her healing as well. So you know, these are not something where they said, you know, oh, I'm going to do this. No, it's something that could kind of emerged. They were emergent healing processes, I would say.
So you didn't detect any pattern among the participants of any kind?
The pattern, you mean like relating patterns that were equivalent to each other, or a pattern in their process, like the
or
timing
related
of
to the archetypes that you talked about, they're being embedded in, or their attachment style? It sounds like you didn't see patterns there.
No, not so much, because they were, you know, they were really unique to the person. But I think with Jay, it was about attachment style for sure. Because the nostalgia from the movies was just really reminiscent of his finding a secure place, his secure attachment. And I think, you know, from that, he was able to use the being reminded of that experience, he was able to use it to self-regulate later on. So that, you know, that to me, I think speaks of attachment, continuation. I think with Rose and Ruby, because they were insecurely attached, and in fact, you know, attachment for Ruby was almost non-existent. I don't have a clear answer to that.
Oh, what I just did with you, and I appreciate you sorting it through like the way you just did. I was on a fishing expedition to see if there was some data from the interviews that you did that perhaps cross-hatch the categories that we use to assess the data. So something in the self-healing methods might have been connected to the archetypes or to other aspects of their background. But it sounds like we didn't have enough data, and they were so unique among them that it would be hard to put that together. So that's a data fishing expedition we just went on, Sadhana.
Yeah.
So thank you for doing that with me. And the other question I had was, this is always interesting when we have a methodology that we use a lens with. And the lens is chosen based on the predilections and interest of the researcher before they begin their study. So it's very objective, and it's preset before the data comes in. But I was wondering if you had any thoughts, because it seems like your articulation of the attachment styles using Bowlby and others is very, it added so much to what we didn't get with the Jungian lens. And I wondered if you ever had a moment during your data analysis where you had wondered what it would have been like to use attachment theory as your lens rather than Jung. And I was curious if that ever crossed your mind, what would your data assessment look like had you used a lens of attachment theory only without Jung?
For me personally, it wouldn't have been as clear. Jung's model helped me understand Bowlby's model. So I was kind of coming at it from that. I don't think I would have appreciated Bowlby's model as much. Working the two together, comparing them, really helped me to see, Bowlby's strong points and Jung's strong points, for me, they were necessary to use them together. Trying to think.
Well, that's very insightful right there. What I want to do is share with you that I so want to ditto what Ellen said about your book and moving forward with it. And if part of your assessment could be to say what you just did and give your readers, this will be mostly for the professional readers, but give your readers some sense of what you learned, that Jungian thought can expand an understanding of Bowlby's thought. I think that would be very helpful for your professional readers, and I encourage you to add that, if not in an article, into your book. And don't forget it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Jot down your insights about that for sure.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Thank you. I'll pass this to Helgi, and thank you very much. It was a good dialogue with you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both. Very interesting conversation so far. So maybe I'll start with a couple of comments. First, I want to say what became clear to me listening to you again today, and we've been working together for a number of years now, and I've been
a long time.
I've been reading this, of course, in sections numerous times. But what became really clear to me again today is how much I appreciate the care that you put into this work, and how careful or full of care you are with both the conceptual pieces and with your participants, with their stories, and it really shows that you really put your best attention and careful consideration into and respect to all the pieces. And I think what the dissertation in some way accomplishes goes beyond the closed adoption era stories of your three participants. There's something, again, listening to you today again, there is an honoring of the sort of the mystery of human life over the lifespan, and the complexity that goes into it, from early attachment and sort of the psychophysical parts of that, there's all the way from there to cultural influences, and most centrally the power of narrative and the stories, and how our life and our identity and our belonging is an evolving set of stories, so I think that's a great accomplishment. And of course, human life is also so much more that you didn't get to address, but it really brings these kind of separate levels into a beautiful conversation, and so I think that's a great accomplishment. One question that I have in relation to the stories that you told was if you could expand a little bit more on how, because maybe that's a pattern as far as what Janice just asked. Each one of your participants found a shift in the story of identity and belonging and their being in the universe in some way, right? From orphan to hero, from wasteland to transformation, from being in the underworld to being a wounded healer. So they all over time created or found a story, right? I like your distinction between the emergent archetypes that are more maybe what we could call fate, right? Driven by what happens, and the numinous archetypes of what pulls us forward, the telos in life. But so they each came from one story that is more of suffering, of abandonment, of struggle.
Yep.
To the light. The stories are from darkness to light in a way, and where they found something that grounds and held them. Can you talk more about that transition and maybe what you think made that possible in each of their stories to have this restorying in a way that happened in their lives? Maybe that's a starting point.
So one thing that the qualities that I noticed for each person was a deep curiosity about life, a kind of introspective nature, looking at things from, in an introverted sort of way, courage, tenacity. These were all the kind of personal qualities that I picked up, from speaking with each of these participants, and working with their stories. I mean, they're so deeply embedded in my psyche right now. They will always be part of me. And can you refresh me again a little bit on, you were asking about kind of the lifespan
Well,
part
maybe
of it?
if you could explore maybe some examples from your participants on how, you gave some just now, you said, courage and tenacity, and those were certainly elements how they could heal or overcome something, but also how the transition in the narratives happened or was possible.
Right.
Expand a little bit on that, of coming from a underworld experience and narrative in some way to an upper world narrative that grounded them in who they are, and how to be and how to live and how to be a participant, right, where value and beauty is part of the story as well.
That the archetypal that's how archetypes work in the sense that that transition from, kind of from the suffering state to moving towards healing, of course, involves a numinous experience. And so what is numinous? Archetypes carry the numinous quality, and it experiencing the numinous is a kind of it's a mystic experience. It can be mystical. It can be kind of feeling spiritual. It can feeling of transcendence, feeling of something larger than the ego self. It's like something bigger than you are. It's a mystery, the mystery, and it's very attractive. And I think, I mean, every human, I believe, has that part of themselves where they're attracted to spirit in some way. And, um, you know, it's very commonplace in all people, not just adoptees, that, we heal through the numinous. And even Jung said that, in writing one of his letters, he says the numinous is the heart of therapy. This is where the person finds healing. And each one of us will be attracted to something that speaks to our experience. Like Carl Jung says, that resonant image that's unique to your own biography. So, for Ruby, it was the wounded healer. This is what lifted her. This is what she says. She literally said this, and she says, I found redemption from everything that I experienced in my adoptive family. She says, this was, there could be redemption, because she had reached a point where she thought, what the heck, life is done. I'm never going to get out of this. And when she encountered the wounded healer archetype in the memoir that she read, it literally lifted the weight from her. She became unfrozen, and her energy came back, and she moved out. She's like, I'm ready. I'm going to massage school. It gave her a purpose. It lifted her up and gave her a purpose. And that's how the numinous works in so many ways. For Rose, of course, she went from feeling like, she'd been dumped and abandoned to there is redemption there. I can transform from being an unwanted person to something of value. I can be valued. And oh, that struck me so hard. That's really an important realization. And it's the one thing about the numinous is it gives you an experience. Without it, it's an intellectual activity. But the numinous also, it's like opens your heart. It really opens the person to possibility. And that's where the change happens. In my understanding and my experience as well. So
yeah, thank you. That's interesting that you really see these, we could call transpersonal experience, some form of spiritual, mystical contact with something greater in a way, outside of the little ego, that was central to their transformation, or to their also the transformation of their narratives in a way. Yeah.
Yep.
Which makes me wonder, also again about the general population. How do any of us heal from what we need healing, right? And is that as a central piece, of rewriting stories of suffering into the stories of meaning, yeah, where the suffering, even the unhealed one, like you mentioned, unhealing wounds become part of something that has meaning and direction in a way.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe similarly, as you see this work applying or being sort of moved forward and shared further, and maybe applied to other communities of people, maybe with unusual birth stories, as you said, but maybe beyond that. Could you say a little bit more what you see also as the limitations, and for our audience here, a narrative study can be done with very few participants because it goes so deep in ways. But maybe you can talk a little bit about, as you're hoping to move it forward, how you're also holding the limitations maybe of the meaning that this data has for other audiences, or sort of a wider stretch. How do you address that field of tension?
Well, I might go into McGilchrist a little bit here. And he talks about the two forms of attention in the world. You know, one is a more of a empirical outer nature. The other is a more kind of more inward look, inward attention at things. I do believe that, you know, individuation occurs it's available for everyone, and it really does occur for everyone in some form. But some of it, I mean, if we're looking at how my approach would be applied, it might not be appreciated by individuals or holding a point of view which is more empirical. I did try to overcome that in the way that you know, bringing Bowlby in as part of it. I think he was respected. I mean, he was a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst. He was the head of the children's department at Tavistock Clinic in London for many years. The World Health Organization asked him to write a paper, do a report. So, I mean, he's well respected, you know, in a traditional sense. Jung's work became it was known as being a little non-traditional, a little more different way of seeing things. My hope is to be able to expand a little bit on, you know, the two opposite ways of attending and seeing things, and, you know, help people to see things from wherever point they're coming from, whatever point of view they're coming from, if they can pick up something from the work because of having that comparison, I think would be helpful. Is that kind of answer what you're looking at?
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Okay. I just want to ask the committee again, anything else pop up that you wanted to comment on, or another question you wanted to follow up with?
No, I mean, it's beyond the scope of our discussion here to follow up on your wonderful conversation together about transcending the ego and its relationship to some of the lowering of suffering that these folks experience. But that's for another conversation. But I'm happy to call it an end and meet in dialogue with the committee members.
How about you, Ellen? Would that be okay? You're muted. We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. No, I agree with what Janice just said. Like, I think it could be a very ongoing, deep conversation about, you know, what led to the particular types of self-healing that were chosen by each of the people, and how that connects to, you know, parts of identity that felt fragmented, and how that all came together in various different ways. So fascinating, deep discussion, but not for now. And I'm ready to shift also.
Okay, then let's do that. Thank you, Sadhana. And Hua, if you could manually put us three in a breakout room, Janice and Ellen and me. And in the meantime, while we're discussing, the audience can ask some questions. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Yes. So while we are waiting for them to, you know, come back, how about I moderate this space to academic discussion or academic Q&A. Yeah, if you have any comments or questions for that next work, yeah, please raise your hand, and yeah, we can have a conversation here. Okay, Sue.
Hi, thank you so much for your dissertation and presentation. It was just really meaningful. For me, I am the parent of a adopted daughter from China who I think also would fall into your closed adoption model, that she was basically in an orphanage till she was 1, and we don't have any information. And so I'm curious if in your data or your collection, and perhaps it was outside of the scope of what you were really looking at, if you asked your the clients or the subjects if they had therapy during their life, and if that had helped, and if I'm curious about traditional therapy, non-traditional therapy, if that played a role in any of their experience. Excuse me.
Yes. Part of one of the requirements that I had as part of making it safe and effective for people to participate, it was that they also have some form of active support, and people were chosen because they had either worked with a therapist, either previous or ongoing, or they did some other type of work that was therapeutic in nature that connected them, that they had people in their community that they were able to reach out to if they needed. We did offer suggestions. If anything came up for people, I had recommended therapists they could work with. But really, I was looking for people who had done therapeutic work on their own, because 1, for their safety, but 2, also for their insights. In order to look at things like this, they really needed to have spent some time exploring their experience as an adoptee. And given the age range of the people and that I was working with, of course, they'd had plenty of time to explore. So that was important. So yes, therapy was definitely involved. But I didn't want them to see me as a therapist, because I'm not qualified as a therapist. I'm a psychologist, but not a therapist. So they had to have that development on their own. That's what they brought to the to the study.
Yeah, my interest is in looking at what therapies throughout their life. Now, it's very interesting. They're getting into that later stage of life. What therapies did they find helpful for? That's something that I'm looking for. I have a younger person in my life, but so that's a question. As an adoptive parent, like, what therapies can I, could I move them to, or suggest, or
right. So. Well, much will depend on the person. Some people are very relational, and so working, one-on-one with a talk therapist is helpful. But I think, if you look at like Rose's active imagination, I think, some people find if they lean towards that type of thing, if they're an imaginative or creative person, using art therapy, can help bring up some images, and connect them with emotions and feelings. Narrative therapy, introducing different different stories, and movement therapy. Sometimes the person is, if they're like I wouldn't necessarily say athletic, but some people find their feelings and emotions through movement. So there's a lot of different approaches. Some people like support groups, adoptee support groups, particularly I know of like a number of Korean adoptees. They find community, you know, in a Korean adoptee group because there's particular things that they relate to. So it's kind of a not just, I would say it depends on the person, but talk therapy is not the only, not the only way. You know, it's like you can be creative about it. Things that help bring the person in touch with their feelings and the images and emotions. It's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, I appreciate, I so appreciate your work. It's just beautiful. Thank you. And I guess as a scientist, I'm looking for, how do we collect the data and quantify, you know, but everyone is unique. And so I appreciate it. Thank you. I'll let someone else ask a question.
Hello, we're coming back now.
Welcome back.
Hello, hello. So we discussed the presentation, the answering the question and answer here today during the defense, the dissertation overall, and we all agree that we want to accept the work and pass this defense today. There are a few small minor things that I'll say in a second, but we want to first and foremost congratulate you, Dr. Stupar. You
Thank
passed
you.
this defense today.
Thank you.
Well done. Congratulations, congratulations. And so there are a couple smaller comments and changes on the last pieces that you handed in recent weeks. Dennis and I both have a few comments that shouldn't be any major revisions. And then Ellen would like to suggest for you, when you move this project forward into a book, to address a little bit further of what the attachment piece and taking attachment theory into consideration, what that really did and how that changed the project and what you learned from that, if that's correct, how I'm presenting this, Ellen. But she's not going to require that for now as a change to pass the dissertation, but it would be a strong recommendation for future work to expand that a little bit more.
Okay.
Okay, so if we were in person, this would be when the champagne comes out and the hugs. We can't do that here, so we'll do virtual hugging, exactly.
Virtual hugs.
And another round
Thank
of
you.
applause.
Thank you so much.
Big congratulations to you for an amazing piece of work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very well done, meticulous and thorough and thoughtful, and you were aware of your biases and articulated them and kept them in check as much as we would have expected a researcher to do. So very well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
And if anybody else wants to say congratulations, please, you can unmute yourself. We're in a small circle here now. Okay. Okay, then we'll close here. Again, thank you very much to the committee. Thank you, Dr. Ellen Bader, Dr. Janice Phelps for being here. Thank you to our program and to Huawei for hosting here today. And yeah, congratulations, Sadhana. Thank you for your work.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Wonderful. Congrats.
Congratulations. Yeah. Thank you all for being here.
Okay, we'll hear from each other soon.
Okay. Thank you.
Yay.
Bye.
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 Congratulations.